Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Hope you're fine. So let's start with this second week of membrane separation. So in this week actually we have to discuss about mainly materials and modules of membrane. So before I just start this topic, let me quickly go through the stuff which I have discussed last week. Actually last week we started with the membrane separation, in which I introduced you with the membranes, that how membranes work actually. There was some terminologies related to membrane: retentate, there was permeate, feed stream. So we have talked all about these terminologies. Then we also discussed the various main applications in industry. In this in the second lecture I discussed one of the industrial process in detail, in which we located where membranes are actually used and what was the purpose of membrane. Their membrane were being used to separate actually methane and hydrogen gases, and that was one plant in which toluene was converted to butane and benzene and xylene. So in this process there was one point where hydrogen need to be separated from methane, and their membranes were being used since 1979. And before that we talked about this, that when there were not membranes, so this separation was difficult, because using all other separation technique this was costly and also not feasible. So due to this a lot of hydrogen was being wasted in that process, but later with the development of membrane it became easy to separate these gases, and that helped us to separate those and save a lot of money. So by that already you are aware about now the importance of membranes. So at the end of that lecture I told you that in the next week we will study about various membrane materials and how membranes are arranged. Actually that's called membrane modules. So let's discuss this in this lecture. Actually this I think is the complete lecture or outlines for this week. So in this week actually we have to discuss something about membrane material, that membranes are formed of, or they are synthesized from which materials, then what are different types of membranes, then later on we have to discuss that how membrane work and what are the modules of membrane, how membranes are arranged actually on industrial scale, on large scale applications, and how membranes are synthesized finally. What are the methods which are used to synthesize membrane. Like I told you that just consider the membrane as a sheet, and how to synthesize that sheet. So there are various methods which are used on large scale. So we will quickly discuss all this stuff. So let's start with the membrane material today. Here we have to look at the membranes, or when you look at the various membrane being used for various applications. So you can see few things which are very well known. Suppose if you look at the membranes which were synthesized before 1930, so you can see that they were usually synthesized from some natural polymers. One thing I want to tell you here, that membranes, a lot of membranes are synthesized from polymers, and usually they are named as like organic polymeric membranes. So these membranes, because they are usually composed of polymers, and polymers are coming from organic chemicals, so due to this they are also called as, like, somehow you can say them organic polymeric membranes. So if you look at them, some membrane which were synthesized before 1930, because there was not a big development in various chemical industries, so they were synthesized from natural polymer, and two natural polymer are very common which were used. They are called cellulose and rubber. Cellulose and rubber, they are obtained naturally from various trees. You know that cellulose is the plant cell wall usually is composed of this stuff, that is cellulose, and rubber is obtained from rubber plants, and that was also used as a membrane synthetic material. But later on, with the development of various industries and development in various reactions on large scale, so some material were synthesized which are used for membrane synthesis. So since 1930 you can see a lot of other material which are custom made synthetically, like they are not natural existing, human made, man made, and due to this we are calling them like synthetic, they are not natural. So there are various reaction, but some reaction in which actually polymers, you know that polymers are long chain molecules, so they are actually composed of various monomers, and monomers, you know that monomer is one single unit which keeps on repeating and we get polymer. So if we have two different material, just bring them in contact with each other and they go a reaction type which is called condensation reaction. This is reaction actually in which two molecules combine with each other and they form finally polymer, but there is a release of small molecules, for example water, methanol, or such kind of small molecule are released. Actually due to this, that's called condensation reaction, in which most of the time, if because water is released and water is condensated and separated, so that's named as like condensation reaction. So you can just Google and see many condensation reaction examples, so they are used for polymer synthesis. Also there is another method, you know, for polymer synthesis, and that's from monomers by free radical. You know, free radical is a species which contain like some phase. So we can take monomers and by using catalyst or by any other method you can produce a lot of free radicals, and they just join to each other. Or usually actually free radical contain some unpaired electron, and then that can get connected with another molecule and so on. So they keep on connecting and you get various polymer. As well there are some ionic catalyzed reaction, they also produce polymer. So here in this lecture I will be talking various terminologies related to like chemistry. So I will try to explain somehow but will not go in much detail. So if you feel any difficulty, you can just Google these terminologies and can easily get the definition as well as various examples. So here you can see that with the development of various reactions in the industries, so various polymer was formed, and when polymers were available synthetically, we started using those polymers for synthesizing membrane. One question can come to your mind that why we don't use natural polymer. We have discussed in last week that there are different applications of membrane in various industries, and there are different temperature range, we need some different kind of strength. So actually the naturally available polymer are not suitable for all application. Due to this, people started looking for other ways, other polymers which can be synthesized, and they are custom made. You can just change their properties by using reaction condition, by changing your monomer. So based on your application you can get various polymers. So due to this, scientists started looking for different polymers by using different methods. So when polymers, different monomers are different raw material go under reaction, so you will get different kind of polymers. So here 4 classifications of polymers are quickly or briefly discussed in your book. So first polymer which are formed are long linear chain polymers. For example, here you have an example of polyethylene. Ethylene molecule. So if that start repeating, like you have ethylene CH2 double bond CH2. So if this goes under polymerization, so what will happen? Actually this CH will start repeating, and one H on this side and one H on the other side will be replaced with another CH2 and so on. So just if you didn't get the idea, please, as I advised, I will not repeat it again and again. So just Google it how its chain is formed. So that's linear. Actually that this will start going in one line. They will just keep joining on this side and so on. You will get various, they are in one line, they are linear chain polymers. Then there are branch chain polymer, like there is one example, there are 1,000 but here one example is given, like polybutadiene. So that can also be used as like one of the polymer that is used for synthesizing these polymers and then later on membranes. So this was first one was only linear chain, then there is branch chain, because it will have when you look at the butadiene molecule, it contain actually something on the side chain, not in a main chain, there are something on sides. So here like I think CH3, so on 2 position 1 and 3, and you know that when its repeating unit repetition takes place, there will be some branches. So due to this we are calling it like branch chain polymer. And then there are 3-dimensional highly cross-linked structure typical of condensation polymer. So condensation polymerization takes place between various chemical. For example, you can google this example of phenol and formaldehyde if you are interested in the formula and structure. So you can see that during condensation of this you get one polymer, and that's highly cross-linked. Cross-linked means suppose this is one of the chain, for example there are C, I just mentioned it for simplicity, and there is another chain of this same material. For example these two reacted and you get various chains. So if they are just connected, like here C is connected with this C, overall this C is connected with this C, or sometime other atom can be present inside the structure that they can join with each other. Here I have just joined C for example. So these are actually cross linked, and if they are highly cross-linked, this makes somehow 3-dimensional structure, and in which C are connected on various sides. Definitely it will be fulfilling the its valency of 4, but it will be forming bond on the other side. So they are forming something cross-linked, highly cross-linked structure. And then there is one called moderately cross-linked structure. They are not highly cross-linked, they will be definitely cross-linked, but at few positions as compared to the previous one they will have less cross-linking. So its example is like butyl rubber. One was from where we started, that's the natural rubber, and this butyl rubber which is synthetically prepared or synthesized in industries. So that's actually partially cross-linked, or somehow you can also see one example of polyethylene. Sometimes this polyethylene linear chains can be partially cross-linked with each other, and they will form this structure which will be called as cross-linked structure. So these are different polymers which you can see that we can obtain by polymerization reaction. If you study polymerization, you will see that when various reactions take place, so various types of products you get. Some are linear, some are branched, and some are cross-linked, and some are very highly cross-linked with each other. So when we will use these different polymeric chains or different polymeric products for synthesizing membranes, definitely they will have different properties, because their raw material which we are using, they have different properties. That suppose something is only linear and other is just cross-linked, which one will have more strengths? Can you just think about it? Mechanical as well as maybe thermal strength. So definitely when something is cross-linked, that's joined with various other branches, that will be more strong as compared to other one which is just linear chain, simple chain. They are not cross-linked because they will have just bonds inside main chain. They don't have bond with other chains. So when you will start breaking them, only you have to break their main chain bonds. But if they are also cross-linked, definitely you will need more energy to also break those bonds which are in between the chains, and that actually they provide more strength to the polymers. So let's look at the various polymers which are formed from these various polymers. They are also classified actually into different categories. That's called like thermoplastic and thermosetting polymers. So do you know about this classification already? Maybe you know thermoplastic and thermosetting polymer. So let's look at them. Thermoplastic polymer. Actually thermoplastic polymer is a type of polymer which is mainly formed from linear chain polymers, and they usually soften with an increase in temperature. When you will increase their temperature, they soften and they are also soluble in organic solvents, so they are called thermoplastic polymers. Maybe you studied during FSC or any other course. Thermoplastic polymer are actually those polymer which can be used again and again, because we can melt them, as you have seen that they are usually formed of linear chain polymer. So when we will starting heating them, we can just easily melt them, and they can be separated again into their monomers, and they can be used again. They can be like rearranged, and polymer can be again formed from those monomers. They are also soluble like in organic solvent, because for dissolution, to if organic solvent want to solve any polymer, so what it has to do is just to break their main bonds. There are not bonds in between the chains, so it's very easy for that. So they are called thermoplastic polymers, and that they can be used again. Other are thermosetting polymers. Actually, these are a type of polymer which are usually highly cross-linked. So as we have already discussed in last slide, that when polymers are highly cross-linked, that it's difficult to just separate the chain. So now what will happen when you will start heating them? Because they are highly cross-linked, highly bonded with each other, so their chains didn't their bonds are strong, so they usually didn't loosen or soften. But what happens, if you want to break them, you will keep on heating, so bonds are not broken. Finally this polymer will decompose, and that's is of no use to you now. That's decompose, something is decomposed, that's something wasted. So here these are highly cross-linked polymer which are decomposed at high temperature. When you want to soften them, they are not softened, they just decompose and are not soluble in organic solvent, so they are named as thermosetting polymer. So maybe you know them. They can't be used again, because when you will start heating them, they will not they will not melt, or they will not soften. They will they resist actually heating, and at the end they just decompose. And also other way, which is to solve something, or just solve or make it soluble in organic solvent, so that's also not possible for these kind of polymers. So they are named as thermosetting polymers. So this is just one classification based on that. Those different polymers that you get, you can use those linear or branch chains for making thermoplastic polymer, while cross-linked polymer are usually used for making thermosetting polymers. So then there is another classification of polymers based on arrangement. Actually, here why we are talking about all this stuff about polymer, because as I told you that most of the membrane being used in industries, they are made up of polymer. So due to this, you should be aware about the polymer, that what polymers are, or what are basic terminologies related to polymer. Because when you will go through the membrane stuff, he will be using some terminologies, and then if you are not clear about those terminologies of polymer, it will be difficult for you. Due to this, we are discussing some stuff about polymer, then we will jump towards membrane formed by these polymers. So here is another classification based on arrangement. You know that when arrangement, what comes to your mind when you think about arrangement? Suppose you have all the stuff in your room. Suppose there are books. We just consider that you have a lot of books, you are in the third year now, and you have purchased at least, I think, 8 to 10 books, I hope so. So you have to arrange them in one shelf. So just think over it, if you just arrange them, you place them one after each other, and they are arranged. Another you just throw one on the sofa, one on the bed, and one is on the table, one is inside somewhere in the shelf. The stuff is just scattered. So polymer are also just based on this stuff or arrangement. They are also categorized or classified based on this arrangement. Like polymers are amorphous or crystalline. When we look at this amorphous, morph Morph is something related to like shape. Amorph, which didn't have any shape. A is used for not, like that something does not have any shape. So amorphous refers to the polymer that is actually glass like in appearance and like crystalline structure. Crystalline, when there is a crystal, just think about it like crystal structure. If you look at the sugar crystal, they are we call it sugar crystal, you know, because they are in a proper shape, they are arranged in a proper shape. So that's crystalline something. So if something is not in shape like that, suppose you have some powder. So powder is usually like not in some specific shape. So if like here one polymer that is not in a proper shape, and that lakes actually that doesn't have any crystalline structure, that is called amorphous polymer, and they are usually glass like appearance. Like if you will look at them, they are like glass like. I mean they are transparent, because you know glass is most of the time transparent. Actually glass is being used here for transparent. Maybe some of you can say okay, there are colored glass available, but here just think about it like it's transparent. These polymers are called amorphous polymer, and other are like crystalline polymer, in which they are highly structured, and when they are highly structured, they provide us actually opaque structure, or they are opaque when you look at them. Just think about it. For example, you use polythene bags, these shopping bags, commonly most of the time you have. So some of those are like they are transparent, and some are like opaque. So from here you can get the idea that all those which are like transparent, they are mostly amorphous polymers, and while the other which are mostly opaque, they are made up of good plastic and are polymer, and they are usually opaque, they are crystalline. So here in this example you can see that when polymer, you know that polymers are long chain, and various monomers just join together and make a polymer. So overall you can see that if this is one layer, actually this is one chain, and if various chains are just randomly placed somewhere, so they are making something like amorphous, while other, you know, that they are just arranged in a better way, so they are making it crystalline. So overall just look at this portion which is presented here. Like you can see that there are various chains, but they are arranged in a structured way. Also at various other points here inside this structure, they are somehow highly arranged. So these portion of this main figure are crystalline, while other you can see that they are not properly arranged, and they are just scattered around. So like here in blue portion you can see that they are amorphous region. So overall inside this we can see amorphous region, and when you look at this diagram, this figure, you will see that this is actually amorphous as well as crystalline at the same time. I mean some parts are crystalline and some parts are amorphous. So this amorphous and main crystalline helps us further. When you look at these polymers, if temperature of a glassy polymer is increased to a glass transition temperature, the polymer becomes rubbery. You know, glass is hard mostly. It is stiff object, but something about rubber, just think about rubber. Rubber is like something which is soft, which you can mold somehow. So here he is telling us that if some polymer is glassy polymer mean it will be like glassy polymer. He is naming it to amorphous polymer, because amorphous polymer, they look like glass. Due to this he is calling it as glassy polymer. So in these polymers, if you just heat them up to some temperature, and that's glassy temperature, temperature of glassy polymer is increased to the glass transition temperature, the polymer becomes rubbery. What is this glass transition temperature? Maybe this is new terminology here for you, so I will just quickly tell you the definition, but if still you need more information, just search for its definition and more details. A glass transition temperature is the temperature which is specific towards actually glassy polymer or amorphous polymers. So it's just the properties of glassy polymer. So the temperature at which polymer turns from this hard structure of glass to the rubbery structure, that temperature is named as like just glass transition temperature. Its name also indicate glass transition. Transition is something changing. So glass transition the temperature at which glassy polymer change its glassy structure towards rubbery structure or rubbery appearance. So that's called glass transition temperature. So all different polymers have different glass transition temperature. When you will heat them up, so they will provide you different glass transition temperature. At different temperature, actually they turns from glass to the rubbery material. So in rubbery polymer, portion of the chain can move. Now here you can see that in these polymers, which were actually amorphous polymer, which were initially in the form of glassy polymer, but we increased their temperature, and with the increase in temperature actually they turned into the soft material. So that's the rubbery polymer. Now that's called rubbery polymer. So overall you can say rubbery polymer are those polymers which are amorphous in nature, and they are available at the temperature above its glass transition temperature. So those polymers, rubbery polymer, portion of the chain can move and backbone can rotate. You know that polymer are form of various repeating units. So here he is calling that these portion of the chains can move. There will be various chains of the polymer. So when you heat it up, it becomes rubbery or soft. How it becomes? Because now its chains are not that stiff, they are not that hard, they can be moved somehow. So when they are moved, overall also backbone chain, backbone, suppose some polymer you have, and that contains some side chains, and one will be the backbone. Suppose this is one chain in which like we have discussed the example of 1,3-butadiene. So that contains some chains on the side. So this is on the side, and while this is the backbone, so all other are side chains. So in rubbery polymer, actually this backbone can also rotate, that can also move, that is not stiff. So that results in high diffusion rates of the permeate. You know that all those chemicals that pass through, all those material that pass through the membrane are called permeate. So when your chains of the polymer are not very rigid, they are not stiff, they are not highly packed with each other, they have some rotation in between them. So there will be the spaces, and between from those spaces diffusion of those molecule can take place easily. By the way, here one assignment for you is to look for the diffusion through the membranes, because we will be talking about this diffusion, and you have studied it even from the FSC, that diffusion, how diffusion takes place through various materials. So here you have to look for diffusion through membrane. Kindly just go through any book or Google stuff, and just look how diffusion through the membranes takes place. So in glassy polymer, thermal motion of the polymer is largely curtailed. He is comparing here actually rubbery polymer with the glassy polymer or amorphous polymer. You know that amorphous polymer, that is below, that is at the temperature below Tg or glass transition temperature, that is here in this portion, suppose that is glassy one, and as I told you that above this there will be like rubbery polymer. This is overall classification of amorphous polymer, but that can exist either as a rubbery or glassy polymer. It depends on Tg. Less than Tg there is glassy, and above Tg there is rubbery polymer. So as we have discussed in the last point, that rubbery polymer their chains can move and they allow high diffusion, but when you go back to the glassy stuff, so glassy polymer they will be definitely packed better as compared to the rubbery polymer. So here overall thermal motion of polymer is largely curtailed. Curtailed means stopped, reduced, so that results in low permeate diffusion rates. So here, from here, what you can conclude, that suppose you have membrane of some specific polymer, and that will behave different at different temperatures. So this is important point to note here, because if you will increase the temperature, maybe its nature change from glassy polymer to the rubbery polymer. So when it will change, its diffusion rate, diffusion of various species through the membrane will increase. while if temperature is less than this glassy temperature, so glass transition temperature, so at less than this, definitely the chains are more packed and it is a bit difficult for various molecules to diffuse through. So due to this reason, you should be aware about various polymer behaviors when you are selecting the polymers for membrane synthesis. While this started actually from where it started from classification of polymer. There were amorphous polymer and crystalline polymer. After discussing their definition, we have talked something about amorphous polymer, glass transition temperature, amorphous, and then further there is glassy and rubbery polymer and their behavior for diffusion. Now let's look at this crystalline polymer. Do they have any transition temperature like glass transition? No. Actually, they don't have any glass transition temperature. Crystalline polymer are highly packed and they don't have any glass transition temperature. It means when you will heat them, there is no temperature at which like they will just turn from glassy to the rubbery structure. No, nothing. But they have some different behavior or different temperature, that's called actually melting temperature. So in crystalline polymer, when you keep on increasing their temperature, so the one stage will appear when they will just turn melt, their chains will be totally broken and they will start melting. So if the temperature of crystalline polymer is increased to the melting temperature, the polymer will melt. Here you will not have anything in between like some transition. So however, if there is a thermosetting polymer, it never melts. As we have already discussed, that thermosetting polymers can't be melted, they can't be used again, so they actually decompose. When you heat them up, they will not melt. You will reach to one stage when they will just decompose. So here if you will have some which polymer, if you remember, other type was thermosetting and thermoplastic. So thermoplastic polymers which are crystalline in nature, and if you increase their temperature, you will reach to one temperature where they will melt, and that's named as melting temperature or TM. While for thermosetting, we don't have any glass transition or something like this melting temperature. So most of the polymer which you observe or which you see, they are actually not completely crystalline, not completely amorphous. You will see they are mixture. They are somehow mixture of or formed of both amorphous and crystalline. So when the polymer setting takes place, polymer chains are arranged. There are both type of arrangement, amorphous and crystalline. So as he has mentioned here, that many polymers have both amorphous and crystalline regions, and that's a certain degree of crystallinity that varies from 5 to 90%. When you know that there is some mixture of amorphous polymer and crystalline polymer, so what do you think? Do they have any melting temperature as well as glass transition? Yes. First of all, here for this point, just consider that they are like thermoplastic polymers. They are not thermosetting, because thermosetting will not have any TG or TM, but thermoplastic will have, as this is a combination of amorphous and crystalline. So overall these polymer will have both temperature. They will have glass transition temperature as well as melting temperature. Glass transition temperature, why? Because some part of this polymer is amorphous. When it is amorphous, amorphous polymer have these properties of glass transition temperature, while other portion is crystalline, and crystalline polymer have melting temperature property, so they will have this property. So glassy polymer membranes can operate below or above Tg. You know that suppose you have one glassy polymer, just go back to the last slide. So overall you have seen that we have discussed about glassy polymers, and you know that below Tg, I have told you that they are considered as glassy. Overall I can say that these are amorphous polymer, and below Tg they are glassy, above Tg they are rubbery. So overall, what do you think, that they can be operated even below Tg as well as above Tg, because still that's polymer that is not melted, that's just its structure is somehow that was stiff initially, that is converted to some soft stuff, that's rubbery, but still it can be operated. But when you look at these other polymers which are crystallines, so you know that we can just operate them below melting temperature, because if I keep on increasing their temperature, so and I reach or I just cross this melting temperature, all the chains will be melted and then it will not exist, there will be no polymeric structure, you will have monomers and that they are melted. So actually when you have to operate these membranes which are crystalline, you should know that what is your temperature limit, what is your range, and you don't have to cross that limit. So there is one thing called degree of polymerization. Maybe you know that degree of polymerization is indication of number of repeating unit. Suppose you know that you have polyethylene, you know that polyethylene, it was CH2, so just we take it like CH double bond CH and 1H, we will just write outside bracket here H1 and on the other side there is H. Overall this is one repeating unit, and maybe you have seen this formula sometime, there is something called N written here. N mean how many repeating unit of this ethylene will be repeated to make this polymer. So that's called degree of polymerization, and various polymers have different degree of polymerization. Sometime it varies from 1000 to the many thousand, like sometime you have 100,000 repeating units, sometime you will have 3000 4000 repeating units. So based on that, various polymers are formed and they have different properties. So that's number of repeating unit is called degree of polymerization. So if some polymer has high degree of polymerization, definitely that will have more repeating unit, more number of monomers will be needed to make that polymer, and that will have different properties as compared to other which has less number of repeating units. So this is one table from your books, that's table 14.3. I already asked you to go through the table 14.1, that was about industrial applications of these membranes. So here, from here you can see, actually I want to tell you a few points from here, no need to remember all information, but few points should be clear to you. So overall you can see it has various columns. In first column you are given with the type polymer, there are different types of polymers they are given, then which type of polymer is that, actually here three classification are given, crystalline and amorphous actually, and you know amorphous are further somehow based on Tg they are separated into glassy and rubbery. So overall you can see that they are crystalline, rubbery and glassy. This classification is given overall, and then there is representative repeating unit, like repeating unit as I was just telling you in the last slide, that what is the repeating unit of some membrane, some polymer, because polymer is made up of monomer, and this actually repeating unit, or you can say this is monomer. And then there are glass transition temperature and melting temperature are given. So overall when something is in crystalline in nature, you know that for crystalline, as we already discussed, that for crystalline polymers you will have only melting temperature. So for crystalline, here are three crystalline categories given to you, and you can see that their melting temperature are given. They are somehow ranging from 275 to I can say 327, because one is in between 300 degrees C. And other, like overall this is cellulose triacetate, that's crystalline membrane form are made up of this material, and this repeating unit is given here, this large molecule, this is one unit, and if their various units are just connected with this, you will get crystalline polymer, and it has melting temperature of still 300 degrees C. When there is another polyisoprene, that's natural rubber, and natural rubber, its formula is polyisoprene. So isoprene is given here to you, and it will repeat and finally formed natural rubber, and that's rubbery in nature. Actually when you look at this, it will exist in the form of rubbery stuff. So here you can see its glass transition temperature is given, that's -70. above -70, if we are looking at some stuff at this temperature, room temperature, like if 30-40 degrees C, so definitely we are well above this glass transition temperature, so that will exist in the form of rubbery. As I have just told you that if something is existing at temperature above Tg, that's rubbery, and if something will be below Tg, that will be like glassy in nature. Suppose if we just reduced the temperature of this polymer and we go below -70 degrees C, like we go for -80 degrees C, -90 degrees C, it will be converted to glassy polymer. And then there is another polymer crystalline, and let's look at this. That's some glassy polymer, polycarbonate. This is given here, that is glassy in nature because its glass transition temperature is 150. And suppose we are just looking at this with respect to, actually this classification glassy or rubbery with respect to your ambient temperatures, which are normally 25 degrees C. In literature standard temperature pressure conditions you look, so that's like 25 degrees C. So because this is well above this temperature, and that will be in the form of glassy polymer. But suppose if we just raise this temperature and we go beyond 150, suppose we raise temperature to 200 degrees C, this will be converted from glassy to rubbery polymer. So overall, you can also look at various others which are provided here. From here you can get the idea that suppose we have to apply the membrane for some specific application, and our temperature, what is our temperature? Suppose one membrane that is good for separation, we just consider, suppose this same stuff, polycarbonate. Let's consider it like this can be used for some separation of for example it is used for separation of H2 and CH4. If suppose you have H2 and CH4, so I think yes, this polyamide, he discussed, if I recall properly in last lecture when we discussed, I think polyamide membrane was even used for that separation. So if I'm wrong, just check please. Maybe I didn't recall properly, but I think polyamide membrane was used for separation of H2 and CH4. So if we have to separate them, just you can see here that this glass transition temperature is changing from 310 to 365, but above 365 definitely it will be existing in the form of rubbery, confirm. But suppose this was giving good separation when it was glassy. Separation, that we were looking for the membrane which can allow hydrogen to pass through, and it can stop methane. Just for example, think about it, that it was performing very well. Our temperature was below 310 degrees C, so it will be glassy polymer, and hydrogen is only separated, or hydrogen is only permeated through the membrane. But if your temperature of the system increase and it reach to the 400 degrees C, for example, when your temperature will reach to the 400 degrees C, now you know that it will be converted from glassy to the rubbery, because we have crossed its upper limit of glass transition temperature, because this was a range, and above this definitely it is completely rubbery, and we are talking about 400. So at 400 degrees C, definitely its permeability will change, and maybe it can allow CH4 also to pass through. So at this temperature you will not get very good separation of hydrogen from CH4. So due to this problem, you have to look at the application where you have to use and up to which temperature you can use your membrane made up of some specific polymer. So for example, if you have to separate a binary chemical mixture, and your membrane is a polymeric membrane, so that must possess high permeance and high permeation ratio for the two component being separated. What does this mean? Suppose we have a membrane, and through that membrane we have to just separate a binary chemical mixture. Here we are just for simplicity considering that we have a binary chemical mixture. So binary means that will contain two components, like we were just discussing, there is hydrogen and CH4. So that when you have to select a polymeric membrane, it should have very good permeability for one of the component, mean as he mentioned that polymer must have a high permeance. Permeance actually is to allow something to pass through. Like if suppose it is selective for the hydrogen, it allows hydrogen to pass through. So we should select such material which allow maximum hydrogen, highest capacity of the hydrogen to pass through this. As well, the permeance ratio should be high. What does this mean? Suppose one of the component, it means one of the components should have very high permeance through the membrane and other component should have very less. Then definitely you will have high ratio, because some, suppose just for example we consider one has a permeance of 1 and other has permeance of 5. So here this ratio is 5. But for example if you have something like 5 by 4, so it's mean this is allowing both of them to pass through and they both have very good permeance through this. So in this case definitely your separation will not be good. So your membrane should have high permeance for one of the component and it should have always high permeance ratio, and that's high permeance ratio is only possible when one component can easily pass through while other can't pass through that membrane. So when you look at this permeance, so permeance for a given species diffusing through a membrane, suppose any species that is passing through the membrane. So permeance for a membrane, permeance for a specific component that is passing through a membrane of given thickness. So this permeance is actually analogous to mass transfer coefficient. So what does this mean? Our permeance, actually you can, for your understanding, you can treat it, you can take it like something mass transfer coefficient. Maybe you remember somehow the mass transfer coefficient. So mass transfer coefficient is defined, or you have something like units in terms of flow rate of some species per unit cross sectional area per unit driving force. Just maybe I can write here quickly for you. K is equal to flow rate. Suppose we have molar flow rate, so I will call it like because we are talking about one of the components. Suppose there is component A and we are talking about its permeance, so its mass flow this mass transfer coefficient will be equal to molar flow rate of this component through the membrane per unit area, cross sectional area through which this component is passing, and then per unit driving force. There is driving force. Suppose in mass transfer you have driving force of concentration gradient, suppose delta C, so change in concentration gradient. So this is mass transfer coefficient, and based on this you can define its unit as like there will be something like suppose molar flow rate, so it is mole per second per unit area per unit this unit of concentration gradient, that will be here somehow mole per cubic meter, for example. So based on this you can look that permeance is something very close to like or analogous that have is to mass transfer coefficient. Permeance, when we say permeance of something, as I told you, permeance means something is simple meaning is to allow to pass through, but in technical terms permeance is something flow rate of some species through some specific area per unit driving force, that's called permeance. So this permeance is actually that's something that has some link with the thickness of the membrane. So overall when you look at this molar transmembrane flux mean flow rate per unit cross sectional area of the membrane. So when you look at this molar transmembrane flux, molar flux through the membrane through the cross sectional area of membrane for any species I, so that can be written as this n shows for flux of that component. I is equal to PMI over LM multiplied by driving force, and that is equal to PMI prime multiplied by driving force. Let's look at these, what does this all stuff mean. So PMI is the permeance, and that permeance is actually the ratio of this permeability divided by the length. So LM is the here membrane, sorry, thickness, not length, thickness of the membrane, and PMI is the permeability of membrane. So suppose you have to find the permeance of the membrane. So how you can find? You have to look for the permeability of the membrane, permeability of some specific component through the membrane divided by thickness of the membrane. From here you can get the permeance, and when you will multiply this permeance with the driving force can be like pressure difference, concentration gradient, anything like this, that will provide you a molar transmembrane flux. So permeance actually depends upon specific thickness of the membrane material and is defined as ratio of permeability of membrane to the membrane thickness. As I have told you that this PMI prime is defined as permeance, and that's the ratio of permeability divided by membrane thickness. So this will definitely change with membrane thickness. You can see from here, suppose we increase the membrane thickness, so what will happen? With this, permeance will decrease, and when you are decreasing the permeance, so that means actually you are just decreasing the molar flux through the membrane. Just consider, for example, you have a very thick membrane. So if membrane thickness will keep on increasing, definitely it will be difficult for various molecules to pass through the membrane, and that will decrease your flux through the membrane. Permeability, this is the fundamental property of membrane material, and that's usually provided in the literature, or they are based on some experimental stuff. So this can be seen from the literature, that what is this permeability. They are usually given for all different polymeric material, and you can use them to calculate this permeance. So now let's look at the membranes. Up to here we were talking mainly about the polymers, and in the last slide we just discussed something about permeance, because we mostly talk about this permeate, retentate. So you should be aware about this, that's something, what is permeability, and how does it affect the flux through the membrane. So let's now talk about various membranes, how membranes are classified when they are formed of various polymers. So they can be characterized as dense or non-porous membranes and porous membranes. Dense or non-porous, as its name indicates, that didn't contain mostly pores, or the pores are of, we will see, they are of very small size as compared to other, which is actually porous, and they have pores of different sizes. So let's look at this. In dense amorphous membranes are also referred as non-porous membranes. Pores of microscopic dimensions may be present, but they are generally less than a few angstrom in diameter. When you will look at the porous, and you see at the classification or the pore size, you will realize that they are more or less non-porous, or their pore size is very small. In some of the text, actually they are totally referred as non-porous membranes, but in your textbook he is mentioned as that they have very small pores, few angstrom. You know, angstrom is unit of length, and that's equal to something 10 raised power minus 10 meter. They have diameter. If they have pore, they will be few angstrom in maybe 1, 2, 3, like this, very small amount, very small value actually. So they are called dense membranes. So when you look at these membrane which are dense membrane, or we are referring them as actually the membrane which don't have any pore, or pore are actually very small in size. So in these membrane, how then separation will take place? Actually here material properties are responsible for this separation, or separation of various component which you want to separate with the help of these membrane. so it is capable of separating molecule approximately the same size. As you know that here we are saying they usually don't have the pores, or pores are very small in size, so even these membrane can be used to separate those chemicals or those molecules which are same in size. Because later on when we jump towards porous membrane, you will see that they are membrane which work on the pore based on pore size actually. But I don't want to go to its detail. Later I will talk about porous in the next slide. So here just think, when some membrane is non-porous or very small pores are there, so that has one advantage, that it can even separate those molecules which are same in size. How this separation will take place? As he mentioned here, that this depends on the properties of the material. What are those properties? Here the separation is based on difference in solubility or diffusivity. Most of the time here you will read this word solubility through the membrane. Solubility through the membrane actually means something, diffusion of something through the membrane. Actually it didn't mean anything that gets totally dissolved, like you don't think it like something like solution is formed. No, it is just diffusion. Solubility here in terms of diffusion. So he mentions that when you want to separate some molecule and they are same in size, now you have to select such polymeric material which we should say which have good permeation capability or good solubility for one of those. So that component which will easily pass through, will easily diffuse through this membrane, but other will just stick or stay on its surface, and that will not pass in a large amount, but you know that will, even if it pass, it will be in very small amount. So intrinsic properties of the polymer determine the extent of selectivity and permeability. Intrinsic, it's natural, which are I should say which are actually the properties of membrane, or which are its characteristics, natural characteristics, or we should say like the synthetic characteristics of this polymer. They will determine the extent of selectivity. What does this mean? Extent of selectivity mean how much selective this membrane is. As I was telling you that you have to select such membrane, such material which allow one of the component to pass through. It should have good permeation, good permeance for one of the membrane, one of the component of the feed, while it should also have at the same time high permeance ratio. High permeance ratio mean it allows one of the component to pass through it easily while other can't pass. That's actually mean it is selective for one of the species. While it also has how good it is permeability, so it also depends on intrinsic property of the polymer. Permeability, how much it is allowing one of the component to pass through. In these kind of membrane, actually separation is taking place based on the properties of the polymer. That's not based on the size separation, because here no size separation is taking place. So overall you can even separate those species which have almost same sizes, but here separation will take place based on solubility or diffusivity of that component, one of the component through the membrane, while other will be stopped because that will not have good permeance or good diffusivity through this membrane material. So next still relating to this diffusivity. So for this case of non-porous membrane or dense membrane, diffusing species must dissolve into the polymer and diffuse through the polymer between segments of macromolecular chains. Diffusion can be difficult but highly selective for glassy polymer. What all this stuff mean actually in these, how this separation will takes place. So actually the component which can easily dissolve, that can easily pass through this membrane, he is talking about this, that can easily dissolve into the membrane and then diffuse through the membrane. Again I am repeating here, dissolve didn't mean that gets dissolved inside the system like any solution is formed. No, a dissolve mean that gets some path to pass through this membrane, that gets some path to diffuse through this membrane, through this polymer. Between the segments of micro molecular chain, you know that these are polymer and there will be various chains, and between these chains through these chains something can pass through, so that's the diffusion path of this membrane. Due to this I have asked you already, few slides back, that just look at the diffusion through the membrane please, how diffusion takes place through various polymeric chains. This diffusion can be difficult, you know that if there is some size based separation, definitely that's good, because there are the holes of some specific size, they allow some of the component which are small in size, then those holes they will pass through the holes and other will just stay at the surface, and that's it, that's simple one. But here definitely this diffusion of some component, something they didn't have any pores through this membrane structure, so something has to diffuse through that layer, so that will be difficult. Maybe this will also require high pressure at the same time, but this will be highly selective, because it will allow that some of the component to diffuse through while other will not pass through, and this has very good application for those system where your molecular size are comparable or equal to each other. So these non-porous or dense membrane are used in those applications. Suppose if your polymer is partly crystalline, so in that case, you know what does this mean? Partly crystalline, it is crystalline as well as amorphous, some of the parts are amorphous, so diffusion will occur mostly, almost exclusively through the amorphous region. Why? Because you know that amorphous region, they are not highly arranged, and they have some vacant spaces through them, so those molecules which are diffusing, they can find some easy path through those amorphous regions, so they will just try to pass through those amorphous region. And with this, so what will happen with the crystalline region, decreasing the diffusion area and increasing the diffusion path. When you have this partly crystalline polymer, through these actually diffusion occur almost mainly through the amorphous region, and with the crystalline region decreasing the diffusion area, because you know that when there is crystalline, that molecule will not pass through, it will try to find some easy path, so actually the crystalline region diffusing path is decreased here, and then it can at the same time overall increase the diffusion path through that membrane. What does this mean? Suppose you have a membrane, as we have seen example few slides back, so there was something like arranged one and other were like amorphous. Suppose any species enter from here and there is a crystalline region, so it will try to avoid it, it will go through the amorphous. Now when it reach to this end, here you can see something is highly arranged again, so now what it will do, it will just try to pass through some again amorphous region. So based on this, overall maybe your diffusion path will increase, but the path of crystalline diffusion, that will decrease in those partly crystalline polymers. The other type, that's the porous membrane. Up to here we talked about dense membrane. In dense membrane we saw that there are no pores, they are non-porous, only diffusion through the membrane takes place, and some characteristics of the membrane material will help us to diffuse some of the component easily through the membrane while will stop others. But other classification here is actually porous membrane, or they are also called as microporous membrane. So microporous membrane contain interconnected pores. Interconnected pores mean pores are connected throughout the surface or structure of the membrane. Suppose just consider the membrane as a that's one like one page sheet. So suppose there are pores on one end, they will be connected up till the other end. There will be pores throughout the membrane structure. So they are interconnected pores. Also pores are interconnected and they are classified into the three types. These porous membrane, or you also can call them as microporous membrane, they are classified into three types. They are microfiltration, ultrafiltration and nanofiltration. So let's look at this, that how they are categorized and what is difference between these three. So microfiltration membrane are those membrane which have pore sizes of 200 to 100,000 angstrom. This is the range of pore size. Suppose if you select any membrane and they have pore size between 200 to 100,000 angstrom, so they are called as microfiltration membrane, and they are commonly used to filter bacteria, yeast and provide cell free suspension. Cell free mean if there are bacteria, cells of bacteria, yeast, this stuff inside some solution, so they can be easily separated through this microfiltration. Because how, as I told you, that how microporous membrane makes separation, they are separated based on the size. So anything which will have as their pore size, suppose just consider that pore size which we have selected here is the minimum one, that is like 200 angstrom. So anything which will be less than 200 angstrom, that will pass through this membrane, but anything above 200 angstrom, that can't pass through the membrane. So maybe these bacteria and yeast, they have the size that is higher than this dimension, so definitely they will not pass through, while other stuff, suppose water and some salt molecule, they can easily pass through this membrane. Next is ultrafiltration. Ultrafiltration, they have pore size of 10 to 200 micrometer, angstrom. 10 angstrom to 200 angstrom, and they are used to separate low molecular weight solutes such as enzymes from high molecular weight solute like virus or cell debris. So they are used for this separation. Like suppose you have to separate somewhere the enzymes from other stuff, so you can use these ultrafiltration membrane. Again, suppose you will select 100 angstrom size here. Suppose anything less than 100 will pass through this, because this is the size of those pores. So all those which have higher than this, they will be just rejected through this membrane. They will go to retentate, and all less than 100 angstrom will pass through. So then there is nanofiltration membrane, and they have pore size from 1 to 10 angstrom. In this range, if they have pore size, so they are called nanofiltration membrane, and they can retain even smaller molecules, because you can see here, suppose even if you select the membrane of this category, and the highest pore size is even 10 angstrom. So anything above 10 angstrom, even that's smaller as compared to the previous ones, but here that will be rejected, that will not pass through this membrane. So NF membranes are used in reverse osmosis as well as per evaporation. We have to discuss these types or these topics in detail in next weeks, inshallah. So we will talk about how reverse osmosis or per evaporation takes place. So these nanofiltration membrane they are used in such application, so to purify the liquids. In actually reverse osmosis, we go for rejection of all salts and every stuff from the water, and we are looking for reverse osmosis technique, which is commonly used for water purification. So you know that you have to pass only water through this membrane and stop all other stuff. So here that will stop, and only water will pass through, because they have very small pore size. So permeability for these microporous membrane is high. If you talk about now the separation and that stuff, so permeability, anything to which this membrane can allow to pass through, so definitely they have high permeability. Why? Because through these anything can easily pass through, because there are pores, they are arranged, they are interconnected, so anything can pass through easily. But at the same time their selectivity is very low, especially for small molecules. Suppose you have to separate very small stuff and they are of same size, so you can't go with these porous membrane. Definitely you have to look back for dense membrane. So here as I already told you that pore size distribution, pore based separation is taking place. So overall there is pore size distribution, as you were looking in the last slide, that micro, ultra and nanofiltration membrane, they have pores of various range. So overall, I mean, you can't create all pores of the same size on membrane surface. Definitely they are on very small scale, so definitely there will be different range distribution of the membrane size. You can't say like this membrane is of only 1 angstrom pore size. No, it will be like range from 1 to 10 angstrom. So overall, due to this pore size distribution, you know, I mean, the membrane selectivity and permeability become variable changes. Separation is mainly by size, so mixture of molecules which are smaller and larger than the pore size can be easily separated by this size separation, because through these pores only the molecules which are smaller in size as compared to those pores, they can only pass through. So these membranes are good for those separation where you are just looking for size based separation, so you can use them easily because they will require less pressure, because molecule can easily pass through the membrane due to this mean high permeability, and the selectivity can be improved if you have smaller and larger. But if all are smaller or all are larger, so definitely then this is not the good choice to go through. So highly selective activity can be obtained when molecules are different in size especially, otherwise you can't get highly selective stuff here. In porous membrane, the dimensions of pores actually determine the separation characteristics. You remember, if you just compare it with the dense membrane, you remember that separation characteristics are based on the properties of the material, that how much is the diffusivity of some specific components through some specific polymer. But here the separation are mainly based on this mean pores, pore size, pore dimension, not on the characteristics of those membranes. While the type of the material, mean different membrane material, they determine only the thermal and mechanical stability. Suppose you are selecting some membrane and some material, so that can, even different material can have same pores can be created in different material, but you have to look for how much strength you need, how much temperature is in your system, so that you can easily select one of the best material that can give you that strength, but it will not control actually flux and rejection mean retentate, which is something not pass through the membrane. So that will only depend on the pores. Flux and rejection depends on pore. Only material type determine its thermal and mechanical stability. But if you compare it to the dense membrane, definitely membrane material plays a lot of role. Along with thermal and chemical stability, it also decide that what will be the flux as well as rejection rate through this membrane. So here when you look at the polymer membranes from various applications, actually polymer membranes are most of the time limited to 200 degrees C. Why? Because as we have looked at a few examples of various membrane material and their types, either they are crystalline or amorphous, and in amorphous either they are glassy or the rubbery. So out of those temperature, you can see that maximum temperature they were somehow close to 300 or 300 something. So for the safe range, here he has provided somehow approximately these polymeric membrane can be used up to temperature of 200 degrees C. In this range they are safe to use, but if you go above this, suppose you say okay, there was some melting temperature of 300, and if I operate my membrane at 300, it will melt at the end. So if you have to apply them in the safe range, so it's better to use up to the 200 degrees C, and mostly in industrial scale they are used mostly. There can be exceptions, but mostly they are used up to 200 degrees C. And to the mixture which are chemically inert, these polymeric membrane which are widely used, but they are used up to some limitations. And what are those limitations? One is on temperature end, their thermal stability, that's up to 200 degrees C, and other is chemical stability, where the components which you are separating, they are inert. Not inert in like only you can separate argon and nitrogen. No, inert means that didn't react with the membrane material, it didn't damage the structure of the membrane material. So if your temperature are above this, or somehow reaction of your those components which you are separating, they can react with your membrane material, then polymeric membranes are not the good choice. Definitely you have to look for some other choices at high temperature and chemically active mixtures. Separation involves something called inorganic material or inorganic membranes. So as I told you in the start that polymeric membrane, as they are usually organic in nature, so those membrane which are formed from them are called polymeric. Other membranes which are formed from other material, they are just called inorganic inorganic membrane. So this is just broad classification. Sometimes even you can come across there is something organic membrane and inorganic. So organic are actually polymeric and inorganic are all other material which we are just going to discuss here. So inorganic membrane actually include various material. They are microporous ceramic, they are metallic membrane, they are carbon based membranes, dense metals such as palladium based membranes. So all these membrane which are inorganic in nature, so they allow the selective diffusion of small molecules such as hydrogen and helium. This specific palladium based membrane is used for this separation of hydrogen helium stuff. So they are selective, they selectively allow some of the component to pass through and get separated. So let's look at here various example of inorganic membrane. I will not go through their details here. Just few example of inorganic membrane. They are mostly like microporous alumina tubes. So here alpha alumina, gamma beta alpha and gamma alumina are two different alumina type, alumina Al2O3. So alumina this can be used to make like tubes, and those tubes have micropores, so they are used for separation. So this is one of the inorganic membrane which is commonly used and then there are glass tubes. They can be used. You know that glass is made up of which material? Silica. So here the glass polymer which we were talking, that was based on their appearance like glass, they are not made up of glass, remember please, because we said something glassy polymer. So glassy polymer, I already explained to you that they are polymer which look like glass in terms of their shape. They are in terms of hardness as well as in terms of their texture. They appear actually transparent like glass, but here that glass is used for synthesizing various membrane, and they will be made up of glass material, and mostly you know that glass is made up of silica, so they are made up of this material. And then there is silica hollow fibers. These are tube, then there are fibers. In next lecture we have to discuss this stuff. Then there are porous ceramic, various ceramic are also made up of such material, clays and this silica alumina, so they can be used as a membrane. There is zirconia and sintered carbon. So just look for these if you are interested in more details of these inorganic membrane. Just google them and you can find a lot of application of these membranes, and they are used actually at very high temperature. For example, one application of this membrane is in I think for at high temperature, one of the application of this membrane is inside you can see oil plants. When the oil is taken from the ground, so that also contain water, and that is at high temperature, so that water somehow can be separated from these membrane, inorganic membrane. Also you can just google for other various application of these inorganic membrane. So mostly they have extremely fine pore size, less than 10 angstrom, so that's necessary for gas separation. Suppose they are being used for gas separation. Gas separation is also somehow linked to the petroleum industry, so if we are looking for gas separation, so that's they should have very low pore size. or even they should be like non-porous for this separation if that's at high temperature. So these inorganic membrane can be used. But if you look at some other separation, so for their large pore can be even used, for example separation of large molecule or solid particle from solution. Suppose you have to separate those solid particle, or sometimes there is a size based separation, large molecule and small molecule, so then you can even use large pores of these inorganic membrane. So inorganic membrane overall you can see that they come in various sizes that can be even less than 10 angstrom, as well as that can be higher than 50 angstrom. So this is the last slide I think for today's lecture. So here there is something called anisotropic, second last, sorry, because we have to just stop with some classification of membrane, and then we will talk about some stuff in the next lecture. So anisotropic or asymmetric membrane. Anisotropic are also they called asymmetric membrane. Actually these are the membrane that consist of extremely thin surface layer supported on a much thicker porous substrate. If you recall the lecture of industrial application of membrane, and there when I was talking about the membrane that is being used for separation of methane and hydrogen, so I told you that that membrane is made up of various layer, and you have seen that there was one thick layer on the top, and then there were porous layers inside that. And I told you that active layer is the top layer, because main separation takes place in that layer, and that was dense layer. And after that there were some porous, or those stuff which are not active, they are just being used as a support. So anisotropic or asymmetric are actually those membrane, they are not symmetric, asymmetric not symmetric, they don't have one symmetry. So like you can see that they have here one dense membrane layer, and then there are dense has no pores, and then there are porous spots inside this. So overall they are called asymmetric. Suppose if something is symmetric, so that will have only one symmetry. So just look at these diagrams. From here you can see that there are two broad classification, symmetric membrane and asymmetric or anisotropic. Or overall you can see symmetric and asymmetric, or isotropic and anisotropic membrane. As I told you that symmetric, something is in symmetry, something which will have throughout the same structure. For example, you can see that there are microporous membrane, and if their pores are somehow close to each other, so they are called like isotropic porous membrane. They have pores, and pores are somehow close to each other. There will be still, you can see that there will be a range, but they are close to each other. As compared to this, if you look at this figure downward here, that has pores of various different sizes, so they are not symmetric, they can be considered as an isotropic membrane. And then there are non-porous dense membrane. Dense membrane, as I told you, that dense membrane are non-porous membrane. Overall you can see there is a thin sheet here, and that didn't contain any pore, or if pore are there, they are of very small size, they are negligible. So this is overall throughout the membrane stuff, this is like dense, there is nothing else, so it is also an example of symmetric. And then there is one other type of membrane which we didn't talk about this, but they are also used, electrically charged membrane. Overall there is a membrane material, and on its surface there are some electric charges, some electric species are there. So you can see here COO negative charge, and throughout the membrane you can see there are various chains, and this charge is connected, charge species are connected to the membrane. There is no other species, so they are also symmetric in terms of this. So these are different types of above three symmetric, all other three down here they are asymmetric. Like in the first one you can see there are the pores, but they are of different size. So this is porous membrane, microporous membrane, but pore are of different size throughout the membrane. So due to this we are calling it an isotropic or asymmetric membrane. Other membrane, you can see here there is a dense layer on the top, as I was talking in the last slide, and then there are porous spot. Most of the membrane which we use mostly with the dense, because dense membrane there is some small layer and that needs some support, so mostly there are microporous membranes are connected to this. So this top layer is now dense, and then there are porous stuff. So this is again asymmetric, because this is not symmetric. The top layer is something else, other layers are something else. They are porous, that's non-porous. And this one also we didn't talk about this, but here they are spotted liquid membrane. Overall you can see there is a membrane structure, inside there are polymer, but with those polymers still we have something in between, and they are actually liquid filled pores. There are the membrane material, and inside there are the pores, but those pores are actually filled with some liquid. So overall, just for your understanding, you can see that there are polymeric chains, and then there is inside some liquid. Actually these membrane are also now being used in industries. They are called like liquid based membrane or liquid filled membranes, or they also named as something mixed matrix membranes, I think. There will be like polymer matrix, and then there will be liquid filled inside this. So that's also the type of asymmetric membrane. Up to here I will just stop here. From this slide we will start next lecture. So just to summarize, we started with the topic of actually membrane materials. Inside that we discussed something about polymers. Polymers are formed from different reactions, and then based on that polymers have different classification, and the classification we discussed, that was something thermosetting and thermoplastic polymer. Thermosetting are those polymers which decompose on heating, and you can't reuse them, they are not dissolved in organic chemicals. But thermoplastic polymer, they can be melted, and they can be just again converted to their monomers, and they can be rearranged to new polymers, and they can also be solved in organic polymers. And then we talked about something called their classification, amorphous and crystalline polymers. So inside amorphous there was something called glass transition temperature, and anything at less than glass transition temperature is glassy. So that's amorphous polymer, but that exists in the form of glassy stuff, and above this temperature that exists in the form of something called rubbery polymer. And then for crystalline polymer we said that there is no glass transition temperature, but there is melting temperature. But thermosetting polymer don't have any glass transition as well as no melting temperature. When you will heat them up, if you heat excessively, they will just decompose. And then we talked about this, that actually membranes are made up of these polymers, and they can be used for separation. So there were dense membranes and porous membrane. Dense membrane or non-porous membrane, they don't have any pores, or the pores are very small in size, few angstroms. So most of their separation, like here you can see this is one dense membrane, so their separation actually takes place based on something called like diffusivity through the membrane. So it should have, membrane material should have good diffusivity for the one of the components of the feed which we want to separate, and for other it should not have good diffusivity, so that we can get good permeation ratio. And then when we talked about porous membrane, we said that they are classified into three categories: microporous, ultra and nano filtration membrane, and they are based on different pore sizes, and here separation takes place on pore size, pore base. So actually if any molecule is less than the pore size, that will pass through the membrane, and any which is above pore size, that will just stay on the surface of membrane. So this was all about up to here. So from here we have to then start next lecture. Thank you so much.